Okay, here we go. Chapter 11, Eisley from Summer with the Marine. Ford had a baby. Well, a toddler. Eisley wasn't sure how old the child was. Where was the mother? He said he'd divorced. She couldn't be upset about it. Maybe a bit annoyed he hadn't told her, and she was desperate for the full story, but she wasn't able to find it in herself to be angry any longer at the man who so tenderly soothed the little girl. He probably hadn't realized she was paying attention to the baby monitor, but he sang her a lullaby and rubbed her back until she dozed back off. It was beautiful. She'd never seen that side of him. Eisley and Ford stood in the living room as the television reported updates on the storm. Ford clicked the button on the remote to turn it off. "Please sit down, I can explain." He balanced his elbows on his knees and leaned forward, then let out a long exhale. "I should have explained sooner." Eisley lowered onto the white sectional sofa in the vast living room. A wall of storm shutters was on one side. They must have opened to windows or glass doors with a vista of the ocean. The mega mansion was professionally decorated and lacked the lived-in feel, but it was tasteful. She felt like she was on a vacation resort. Unlike her mother, she'd have lived there if she could afford it, especially after renting so many crummy apartments with roommates over the years. "Ford, first I want to apologize for barging in here and acting crazy." She went on to explain how she'd seen him enter the mansion and immediately thought he was seeing someone. "But I have to ask outright, are you seeing someone?" "Only you, Eisley. I have to admit that it was a bit crazy." Amusement played on his lips, "but I also won't lie, it's kind of flattering that you'd be so upset by the mere idea of me seeing whatever her name was from Egret Avenue. It does wonders for my ego." "It seems your ego is doing just fine without my assistance." "Well, it's been a while since I've been with anyone." "Then explain the little girl upstairs," Eisley said. "First, I have something to say to you. Don't rush into a storm like that again. It was dangerous and something could have happened to you. Flying debris, coconuts dropping from trees, and rogue waves can wash over the road. I couldn't bear anything happening to you, Eisley." She bit the side of her lip. "Hearing that you care does wonders for my ego, too." "Of course I care. I meant what I said the other night." He hesitated. "If this is going to work, we can't keep secrets from each other." "We never did." "Then why didn't you tell me about your daughter? You used to say you never wanted to have kids." "Eisley, I was 16 and I had no idea I had a kid until last month." Her mouth fell open and she had the sense it formed a perfect O. "Remember I mentioned that Tina divorced me? She left the papers on the kitchen table. Well, it turns out she was pregnant and met some wealthy guy or something. Apparently she wanted to make like it was his kid so he'd support her." Anger carved itself across Ford's face. "Why would she do that?" "I'm just a Marine." She wanted more, I guess. "Just a Marine." She looked around the space. "Marines are amazing, first of all. Heroes, in fact. Second, you seem to be a wealthy Marine yourself." Back to Tina. "So she had the baby and was with the new guy, claiming he was the dad, but the baby looked nothing like him, so over time he started to get suspicious. Their relationship was on the rocks and he demanded a paternity test. At the same time, she left the baby with her parents. While they were waiting for the results, Tina overdosed on pain medication." "Was she sick?" Eisley asked. "She had a substance abuse problem." Eisley pressed her hand over her mouth. Tears filled her eyes. "That poor, sweet little girl. How'd you find out she was yours?" "Thankfully, Tina's mother did the right thing and tried to figure out who the father might be. The dates lined up with our marriage, even though I was deployed shortly after we'd conceived. She reached out to me. Of course, we went through the proper legal channels and had the tests done. It turns out she's mine." The idea that the little girl could be theirs, hers and Ford's, filled Eisley's heart, which was ready to burst over the heart-breaking story. "Tina's parents are elderly and weren't feeling up for raising a child." Ford swallowed. "It's strange how life works. There was a reason, well, a few reasons that I survived the many battles I fought, the ones I still fight, but I have a renewed purpose." His hand brushed the scar by his eye. "So you retired and are now a full-time father?" "Just about. I'm still in the reserves and have training, meetings, and the like. Once a Marine, always a Marine." Eisley scooted closer to Ford on the couch. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have been helping you all this time. You didn't have to do everything yourself, Ford." "I never had help, never needed it." "You never had a baby." He tilted his head from side to side as though conceding. "Well, I do have help now. I hired a nanny." "I meant me. I can help you. You truly could have shared this with me." "I seem to recall you not wanting to have kids either." Eisley cocked her head. "As you said, we were 16. I was too young to be thinking about having kids, but someday, of course. I've had to do a little growing up. I'm still finding my way, but it seems—" She hesitated, then swallowed back her fear. "It seems I was led back to you." He held his head in his hands as though something still upset him. She lifted her arm and pressed his palm to his back, braving contact. The massive muscles rippled as she gently rubbed his back. "Ford, are you ready to take off your armor and open up to me?" He ducked his head and met her eyes. "Yes, I can do that." He blinked a few times, then said, "I distanced myself from you because of the emotions I felt that tied me to you and what I knew being in the military could mean. I could die, go missing, or be wounded for life. I wanted to spare you what happened to your mother. A husband that never returned. So you left anyway," she said, "before anything more could happen between us." "But don't you see, it already had." Her voice was barely a whisper. Ford leaned back and took her in his arms. She rested her head on his toned chest. "Yep, I suppose you're right." His heart beat steadily in his chest, and it was a comfort as the storm raged outside. After a moment, Ford cleared his throat. "What about you? What about letting people help you? What about letting down your guard?" "My guard is hardly up. No, Ford, like I was saying, I need to grow up, figure out what I want from my life. I realized I was stuck in the past, holding on to hope that you would return, and that was keeping me from moving on." "Oh, Eisley," his tone was strained, "I had no idea. I'm sorry. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I thought I was doing the right thing." "We were young, but you haven't told me everything." "What do you mean?" he asked. She sat up and held her arms out wide. "What is all this? If I recall, you lived in the duplex opposite mine, and between the two of us we barely had 2 dimes to rub together. Unless I'm grossly mistaken, most servicemen don't own mansions in their early 30s, or at all." "Right." He took a deep breath. "Around the same time I learned about my daughter, I got another, rather peculiar piece of mail. It turns out my grandfather, a man I'd never known, had passed away. His name was Arnold Conrad, so on my mother's side. I didn't know this, but while my 2 brothers and I had the same father, we had different mothers." "Your dad never told you?" Ford shook his head. "I'm afraid not. So more testing was done, more papers filed, more red tape. It was a headache, really. But Arnold Conrad didn't have any heirs except me. He died alone." "I'm so sorry." A typo. "I'm so sorry. I don't feel right accepting any of this. I didn't earn it, but with the suddenness of having a kid and not having my own parents around, I wasn't sure what to do, so I came here to regroup and make a game plan. Despite how you feel about the money, I'm glad you found your way to Blue Bay Beach. Me too." "So what's next?" Ford asked. She didn't answer because she didn't know. And that is the end of chapter 11. And we will go on. The show will go on. So I'm going to download this, save it, and join me for chapter 12.